Good evening. Welcome back to this second segment of our very special edition of the Glazov Gang with Larry Elder and Dwight Schultz. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
It's so sad because I want about 20 segments, but this is our last segment, so I'm going to try to fit some questions in, and I'm going to ask them briefly, and also, Larry, try to be brief as well, because I want to get to more questions. I'm not telling you you're talking too much, but there's so many sacred things I want to get to.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
One precious part of the book on some levels is just very interesting. When you were a youth, you were crossing the street and started talking back to a cop who was reprimanding you for walking across the street illegally. Tell us how you ended up in jail.
Well, I was walking across the street in Hollywood with a buddy of mine, and the light was blinking, "Don't walk," and we kept going. And there was two officers on the corner, and one of them went like this. And I had an attitude. You know, you don't go like this to me. And by the way,
did you have an extra attitude a little bit at that
no,
time?
I'm just 25 years old and have a tude. You know, you're young, you have a tude.
Yeah.
And so I was working, by the way, for the DA's office. It was my second year in law school, so I was a certified clerk for the DA's office. And the cop, of course, had no reason to know that. So he calls me over like this. I come over, and he says, "You're walking against a red light." I said, "No, I wasn't."
But you knew you were.
Well, it was borderline.
It was borderline? Okay.
And he said, "Yes, you were." I said, "No, I wasn't." He said, "I need to see some ID." I didn't have any on me. My friend was driving. For whatever reason, I didn't have a wallet on me that day. And I told the officer I had no ID. He said, "You have no ID? Why not?" I said, "Officer, this isn't the Soviet Union. I'm not required to have ID. I'm not operating a motor vehicle. I'm walking. I don't require ID." He said, "You're a smart ass, aren't you?" I said, "Call it the way you want to." He said, "You're going to jail, MF." And he took me to jail. And also took my friend to jail, too. It turns out he had some outstanding warrants. Too bad he was with his smart, wiseacre friend, but both of us got arrested. And I spent several hours in jail, and I called...
You seem very happy telling this story.
Well, only because it was... But for my attitude, it never would have happened. Right. And, you know, I respect police officers. They have a tough job, especially dealing with knuckleheads like me. But the amusing thing was, I came home later on, and my dad asked me what had happened, and I told him I got arrested. And my father said, "You were mouthing off, weren't you?" Well, you know.
Larry, I want to be a very, very gentle and careful with this next question, because I'm very sorry at the bottom of my heart for your younger brother, Dennis. Mm-hmm. But there is a narrative that emerged of the conflict over also dad and mom. And I think that Dennis was suffering so much from dad's neglect that there was something that he was taking out on your mom, perhaps. I don't know, but he was very rude with your mom. Mm-hmm. And at one point you had enough and started to beat him. Yeah. Tell us what would have happened if your mom had not pulled you off with Dennis, and what happened on that day.
I'd be finishing up 25 years to life somewhere.
Tell us a little bit about that.
My brother had lots of issues, and I believe that you're right. My brother was far more affected by my dad's perceived coldness than the rest of us. And he did a lot of drugs. You name it, he did it. And one day he was yelling at my mother, using a lot of profanity, which he never did around me usually. I confronted him. He stopped, and I left the house. And turned out, when I left the house, I was in the car. I didn't have my wallet. I guess I have issues with my wallet. So I went back to get my driver's license. I walk in the house. Dennis was cursing at her again. At that point, Jamie, I lost it. I went bat bleep. You curse
Remind me not to get on your bad side.
You curse at my mother like that, you got issues with me. I almost killed him. We fought from the back of the house to the front of the house. You know, like in movies, Dwight, where you take a chair and the chair breaks and shatters over you. That's what really happened. He picked up a chair and it shattered over me, almost like John Wayne. I was like, wow, the chair really does that. And we broke a television set, broke a radio, and so I'm on top of it, and I'm banging, and Jamie, had my mother not pulled me off, I was going to kill the SOB. I always had issue with him. My brother,
but he never talked back to, he never in front of you,
never disrespected my mother when I was there. He would say all sorts of things when I was not around, but when I was there, he was always respectful to my mom, except the time he thought I was not home.
Larry, it took you to shut his mouth. Why did she keep his rudeness to her a secret from your father?
They had a game. My mother and my father worked together for a while at the restaurant. They couldn't get along working together. My mother started working with a phone company, and there was this like rivalry. It was sort of my mom's job to take care of the house, my dad's job to take care of the bills. My mom didn't want my dad to know she wasn't able to handle Dennis, so she often didn't tell him certain things because she feared that my dad would sort of gloat over the fact that she wasn't able to handling everything. It really sounds silly and petty right now, but that's how they were thinking
absolutely.
in those days.
Dwight, tell us a part of the book that really touched you. And you shared a few things with me about when him and his dad went to the movie theater. I really want you to talk about that.
Well, I don't want, as I say, I hate to give away.
Is he allowed to give away?
Sure.
Just a little
well,
it's a segment of the book. There's lots of other things.
There's a lot of stuff in there, but as you progress towards the end of the book, the chapters become shorter and more anecdotal, and I'm wondering. I was wondering what you were getting to, and there's a chapter where you decide to take your parents to hear one of your speeches, and you tell the story, and I'm reading it, and it's very emotional, and then you go to another anecdote. Say, I decided to take my father to see a movie the next day. Sling Blade. And it's the way you worded it too. I cannot tell you the skill that it takes to do this, to make me cry reading a book. But he just leans over to you and whispers, I have to go. And then use that word again. Because it reminds me of what my daddy did to me. He doesn't say what. And I broke down when I'm reading. And you never, ever know what it is that's building up inside of you when you're reading such incredible pictures. And of course, most of us who have listened to you over the years, we know your voice, we know your mother's voice, but we don't know your daddy's voice, your daddy's voice. And it was like the most gentle, it was just there was so much pain in that, unsaid. After all of all that we know now, that you revealed to us that you had, and again, your mother, silent all those years, she didn't let on about his background. And it is the most, because it's dialogue driven, it is the words that you bring to the page that are so effective as opposed to descriptions. And that's what makes this book so unique.
Thank you, Dwight.
But he should do that.
Thank you, Dwight. But Larry, somewhere in even that gentleness, a phrase that your dad used to an abusive father showed a forgiving nature in your father on some levels. But there seems to be a narrative here somewhere of your father forgiving his father on some levels, and in many respects you forgiving your father as well.
And my father also forgiving his mother, who, remember, conspired with the boyfriend to throw him out of the house when he was 13 years old. My father, Dwight, as you know from the book, sent his mother something in the mail every single week. I didn't know what it was until I was an adult. And it was money. And to the point where it ticked my mom off because, we weren't wealthy. My brothers and I slept in the same room until I was in middle school. And for him to send his mother some money every week took money out of our table as far as my mother was concerned. My dad still felt he had an obligation to do that.
And his letters, too. I mean, the one you found and then to you, that common sense, that obligation. Also, can I just ask, can you tell the little Solomon story with you when you were playing baseball, you and your brother, and you had an ethical problem, and tell them how your father solved it.
I love baseball, and my brothers and I would play. My older brother, Kirk, was 3.5 years older. He was a better athlete anyway, but you have a 3.5 year gap, it makes you that much even better. We played on different teams. For the first time, we were going to play each other in Little League. And my brother always just crushed me. I couldn't hit him. He was a pitcher. He threw too hard, too fast. I was afraid of the ball. And I knew he was going to embarrass me the next day on Saturday. So I went to my dad. We almost never asked my father anything like this, but for some reason we thought we would. So we told my father that Larry was afraid that Kirk was going to embarrass me, and Kirk knew that he was going to embarrass me. And so Kirk wanted to know, and I wanted to know, if it was okay if Kirk just kind of threw the ball kind of softly towards me, so I would at least make contact. Just not embarrass myself. My father very quietly listened to both of our sides. My brother was surprisingly sympathetic. He probably was going to do it, lay off on me a little bit. My dad said, Kirk, you try to blow the ball by Larry, and Larry, you swing so hard, I want you to rip the cover off and let the chips fall where they may. So I went out that day. I had the best game I ever had. I hit my brother a home run, a triple, a double, a couple of singles. We won 13-6, and he's never forgiven me for that.
That's just that's just so great.
Yeah.
Larry, one of the things, there's a million things, but what do we focus on in life? What, do we think about our, the adversity? Do we think about our challenges? You told a story the other day at the Wednesday Morning Club that really struck me, and it's part of the theme of how to persevere and what to focus on. There was a poem that was read about a racial slur that was used at a summer camp or something, and there was a profound meaning in something that your mom had said.
Right.
Can you tell that story?
Sure. It was in school, and I took a Black Studies course, and we read a lot of literature, and much of it was angry. We read a poem in class that ticked everybody off, including me, and it went like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. Well, everybody was angry, teacher was angry. We talked about the permanent damage to this kid's psyche, that he'll never get over this. It'll be permanently etched in his memory. So I'm walking home, I'm still ticked off. I walk into the house. My mother was in the kitchen stirring a big pot of greens. I'll never forget it. I said, Mom, we read a poem in class. I want to get your reaction to it. She said, sure, go ahead. I said, well, it went like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now I was young and very small, but he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. My mother took the spoon out of the pot, wrapped it on the side of the pot, turned to me, and she said, Larry, it's too bad he let something so trivial spoil his vacation.
And Larry, and the power in that is now to the simplistic people that might want to attack that. It's obvious that you and none of this is to minimize the hurt of racism, obviously. But what is the deeper lesson?
The deeper lesson is my dad always told me, no one can make you feel bad without your permission. Wow. So unless you actually feel inferior and somebody says you're inferior, it ought to bounce off your skin.
Amen.
Yeah.
Dwight, quick.
No, I mean, that is profound. I mean, that's a profound observation. And I just can't say enough about what you did for me for this book. And I know it's a play or it's a movie. It's either one. It's what you want to make it. Or having just heard your voice for so many years now, for anyone to read this, they know you from the radio, because when you are like you are, you're a friend of all of those people out there listening to you for those 3 or 4 hours, no matter where they hear you. But this book, I know this book is going to be either a major play or a motion picture. I haven't read anything in the last 5 years that I thought had that potential. It's just so good, and I cannot say enough about this book. It's just remarkable.
Dwight, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I would like to say the same, and I want to give, is it okay, there weren't pictures in the book, I think for a reason to keep the imagination.
I wanted people to cast the movie their own way. One of my favorite novels of all time was Bonfire of the Vanities, and it bothered me the way they casted it with Tom Hanks, because that's not how I saw it. So I wanted people to cast this themselves.
But Larry, is it okay if we put a few pictures
of course,
up for
please.
the thing?
Yeah.
This one picture of your mom with the 3 of you.
Me in the middle.
You're in the middle.
And look at Dennis's attitude. That's exactly how he was.
Dennis
always,
is on the left, right?
Always, yeah, that's his attitude. That's
and
exactly
what's the
how
attitude?
He
He looks kind of happy, but
mischievous,
mischievous,
pulling
right?
something. What am I going to pull next? That's how he was.
And Kirk was the older brother that wanted to bring dignity to the family?
I guess so, a little more serious. And me, curious, reflective, I guess.
Tell us a little bit about your mom in that picture. Where was she at that time in her state? Did she have big dreams? Was she happy?
This was at a public park not too far from where we live in our first house. My mom had 1 year of college, which for a black woman was like having a PhD. And it was not uncommon for a black woman in those days to, quote, marry down, which is what she did. Again, my father dropped out of school when he was 13 years old. To marry somebody with 1 year of college is a huge step up. But it was not uncommon because men had to work, and women could go to school. They could become nurses, they could become teachers. But in those days, black men had to go to work. So it wasn't uncommon to find an educated woman with an uneducated man.
Your father as a young man?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about this
Dapper,
picture.
dapper, dapper. Remember I told you I met my uncle, and I found out my uncle roomed with my dad before my dad met my mom. And he told me what a snappy dresser my dad was.
I think he broke a lot of hearts, it looks like. Right?
Looks like he did,
He
yeah.
reminds me a little of Anquan Bolden. Just a little.
Yeah.
One more thing about this picture.
My father was funny, and his sense of humor is something that I really never appreciated until I got older.
And one more. When was this
This was taken for my last TV show called The Larry Elder Show. And
It looks like a happy picture.
Yeah, when my dad and I reconciled, I would like to think that I helped to improve their marriage a little bit. One time they were having some quarrel over something trivial. I never would have done this in a million years, but I went, bam, stop acting like children. And they stopped for 5 seconds, they started up again. And I went, okay, that's their dance.
And when you mentioned dance, I noticed that at the end you noticed that even a lot of their arguing, you realized that it was also a bit of their dance,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Larry, I'm very sorry about Dennis, who has passed, but I'm also very sorry about your mom. Just a couple words about your mom. From the South, believed in education. She was a strong woman.
Hard work wins, and people, after Obama got elected, there was a front page article in the New York Times and LA Times with all these black parents saying, now for the first time I can tell my child, you can grow up to become president. And I said to myself, wow, what would happen if Obama had lost? What were you telling them before that? My mom told me when I was 7 years old I could be president if I wanted to.
Wow.
We sat down and we read a book of illustrated presidents from George Washington to the then incumbent Dwight Eisenhower. And I remember after she closed the book, she said, Larry, if you want it bad enough, you work hard enough, you can be in this book someday.
We are running out of time. Dwight, very quickly before I make a concluding statement.
Just to reiterate that it's a page, it's a burner. You'll move through this, and every page is a portrait and a revelation that you will be able to identify with. There's something here for everyone. There's a person, a word, an event that will tug at your heart and let you know a lot more about this man that you've listened to on the radio for so many years.
Dwight, thank you so
Larry
much.
and Dwight, it's kind of hard to put this into words with something so sacred. Larry, when I read this, you brushed against something that I wanted to say because I was thinking, what can I talk about? And there's a moment in that book when your dad was being abused by his stepdad, and his mom had taken the side of the stepdad. And it was a day where he was being beaten, and because his mom had taken his side, he left the house.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm correct, she looked out the window and mocked him and said, "You'll be back," or something like that.
She said, you'll be back. Either you'll be in a penitentiary or you'll be in the graveyard, one or the other.
And he never, and I think of a person in that moment of that betrayal, of that neglect, of the taking away of love by a mother in terms of somebody abusing you. And he left, and as you say, it was just a couple years before the Depression. It was an African American living in the Jim Crow South. But as you said, he always sent a check every week to his mother. Mm-hmm. And when I think about that, when I think about the forgiveness in your father's heart, and I think about the magnanimity of spirit and the generosity of spirit, the redemption somewhere in still sending her that money, what I kind of wanted to say was that character trait in your father, of that, there's something that touches the face of God in that gesture, that he kept sending that money to your mom after that incident and for such a long time. That I wanted to say that after watching you for so many years, Larry, the way you've carried the torch for your father, that trait in your father, I think, is something that very much you represent. A real great generosity and magnanimity of spirit, and I wanted to thank you for carrying such a beautiful, just carrying on that lesson of forgiveness and perseverance.
Well, Jim, thank you so much for that. I just hope to be part of the man that my father was.
thank you so much for writing Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours. Dwight, last 15 seconds
We're
goes to you.
just very, very, very lucky that they had the hand that they had so that you became who you became. And so many of us listen to you, love you, and now you've given us a permanent revelation about your life.
Dwight, thank you so much for that.
Larry Elder, Dwight Schultz, an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Get this book, Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours by Larry Elder. Join us next week on the Glazov Gang.
Thanks.